Hey, Professor York here this evening. I am covering a very important topic that will help you this next week relative to, first, your client engagement and why you should be using the rubric so you can be successful in presentation 3. Okay, so first we'll cover the rubric and then we will go into a concept around scope. Why do I talk about scope? Because you have 6 weeks to deliver on expectations. How you manage and set up those expectations are driven by your scope. More to come in a few minutes. You may look at this roadmap and you may wonder, why am I seeing this roadmap? Well, today we've had the opportunity to talk about a few topics during our lectures and our work session. We talked about the assignment. Okay? We talked a little bit about the case of Cleopatra. We will talk further in a future lecture that recaps the case as well. We also discussed the art of client service. But today we're going to focus in right now this evening on the scope and the client, because you have client meetings Thursday and Friday. So the client presentation, okay, this next week. All right, this is the presentation that you have. We have in our rubric some upfront items that deal with the letter, the engagement, and I'll be there, and the team involvement. You're familiar with the form issues, and you're familiar with the presentation. Relative to content, which I always find that's the sticky point when we come to these presentations, is let's get to the nitty-gritty. Do you have a situation analysis? A good SCQR? I think that you're on the way to doing great SCQRs, but there's still some improvement opportunity. Those are still worth 8 points. What's critical in this presentation is going to be your scope of work. Why? Because that's what you're going to be tied down to, and I'll talk a little bit further about FOD in a few minutes. Tied to that is the objectives and what the client has stated. Okay, are they quantitative? If not, how can you help the client redefine them? Because sometimes clients are not very clear. Do you have a defined project plan in terms of specific activity, milestone deliverable, someone responsible and date? And then what additional clients? So this is a lot easier and simpler, and I should expect to see better grades. But this is the wild card here. Client. Excited about the opportunity, willingness to help, willingness to take time. Do you have a scheduled time? And do you understand the role, and do they understand the role, and how do they express it? And why do we scope? Well, we scope because the client always wants the Lamborghini, or the Ferrari, or the Porsche, but in reality can only afford the Yugo. So we need to be able to tie this down. And I've been able to do that in my own practice. I have to do that in my own practice because realistically, running a business is if I don't get the proper scope and I put resources up against it, basically we do not make revenue on that, but more than revenue is we don't take margin. And if you don't take margin, you can't sustain your business. So that's why we need a tight scope to be on target with the client needs, but also be successful in delivering the deliverables successfully. So not just about your business, but also managing and delivering on client expectations. So critical to that triangle of trust, relationship, and great work. You do it well, and guess what? You're invited back to the party, and that's what we want to do, is repeat business. So when we do this, we need to think about some parameters or constraints that can affect our projects. First and foremost, as we talked about scope, we don't tighten our scope. What happens is it eats time and costs. Okay? It has financial impact. And last but not least, we'll see this contract that all has to have in the middle is quality. There's no free lunch. So while some product managers may look at the lowest budget, some of us buy the cheapest product, but the reality is that sometimes the cheapest product is not the cheapest product, and that we need to look at the bigger picture. Some people feel like when they're in the middle of dealing with putting a scope is that it's not clear. And, this is a key issue, is to understand how clarity projects can lead to success. Okay, that's what scope is about, and how frustrating that lack of clarity can make a project. If you have undefined, if you have a client who won't be transparent, then what happens is it makes it very difficult to get that FOD defined out and your scope of work. You can't do that. You can't properly allocate your resources and budget your resources and give a proper proposal. So, here's our friend, FOD, Frame, Objectives, Deliverables. These items need to be clearly defined. So this is something you should be thinking about in the next few days as you deal with clients. Okay? So that comprises a good scope. If you don't get it in your meeting, get it in follow-up. So let's talk about Frame, which defines this. This has been the McKinsey engagement. It's something that McKinsey and Company really emphasize in consulting. Example, elevator's too slow. The solution is, well, let's make it faster, okay? And these are the ways you can do it. But the question is, are we really solving the right problems? Let's take a little bit different look. Is it that the elevator is slow? But if we reframe the problem, maybe it's about the weight being ignored. So I look at the solution. I'm trying to solve the issue of, do I make the wait feel shorter? Pick up mirrors, play music, install. You see this actually a lot of times in restaurants. Okay? We did this over at Moffitt, and what we ended up doing was taking a very complex project and making it more meaningful to the client by flipping the scope a little bit. So sometimes you need to sit there and you need to refine it. So your questions and what you negotiate are very critical. So what about these objectives? Okay, we're into O here. Okay, we went to Frame, then we go to O. It's active, oriented statements define specifically what to do. And they're SMART, and we talked about SMART. Specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. About those deliverables. This is what you're going to be measured at the end of the day. What you deliver. Whether it's a data, marketing plan, branding profile, maybe I'm going to say a branding guide. Maybe it's a marketing campaign. You'll have a final presentation. It'll be in Minto style. That may be the deliverable. So you need to make sure you're very clear about what you're delivering. And here's an example using a house. We have milestones that apply time or points in time to key pieces. Permissions, starting the process, moving into the house. But the deliverables are what the outputs that we want. The drawings, the building, and the kitchen. And so those are things we have to think about relative to deliverables that are there. I'll give you two quick real-world examples from proposals I've done. This one doesn't, these don't have the frames in there because I've had a non-standing relationship with the client. But these are two different clients. But I clearly define objectives and description of service and scope of work. Very clear cut that we know and what we're going to deliver, especially when we're in a tight budget. And this was very important. And then things that go out of the scope of work come back and charge them to be able to deliver what their needs are. Okay, in this case, okay, we're doing on a paper, we're doing the same thing. We talk about the service, the objectives, and this is our deliverables that are here. This is the manuscripts, and then our scope of work. And that was just to develop, and that's key about your language. We'll develop. Doesn't mean submit. I'll just create them. Okay? And as you look at it, what it says is draft initial, run drafts, circulate drafts, update. Right? So your language and your scope of work are very critical. I did this because a client was being very tight in their budget, and we put a lot of stuff in the back end. So the bottom line is FOD. That'll lead to project success. Frame it, understand, and make sure you've controlled that frame. Make sure that you have defined very, very clear and smart objectives. And make sure you've defined deliverables. This is going to be very critical, not just for your presentation next week, but also for your final presentation and deliverables that you come forth. If you have questions, I'm always available for coaching, counseling, etc. I hope this lecture was helpful. I look forward to seeing you in class soon.